Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 118 in the series. Yes, I'm still numbering them. So welcome to the yarn room. For those of you who are coming back, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for all the messages and the fun we're having in the Ravelry group and the comments. It's been a wonderful couple of weeks communicating with you. And for those of you who are new, welcome to the yarn room. You might be coming over from the Sweet Georgia interview or podcast over there, or from some other podcast. Maybe you saw this one in your YouTube feed. Welcome, it's lovely to have you. This is usually a podcast about sweaters, design, modification for the most part, but we talk about all kinds of things. And today I'm going to talk about strategies for trying new yarn as one of the major topics. So we do a little bit of everything here, and welcome, it's lovely to have you. So I'm coming to you from New York, where it is a frigid, we're in the frigid single digits at this point. So it has been a very cold January for us, and we usually, for those of you who are tuning back in, you know we take long walks, and once we get into the single digits, it's a little hard on the dogs, and it's a little hard on the humans too. So we've been not doing so much outdoor activity of late, which is kind of sad because I love getting out in the sun. Even in the 20s, I'll go outside, but once we get down to the single digits with a wind chill advisory, I'm a little bit like, I'll stay inside. So we've been putting on all the woolies, 2 or 3 hats, and trying to get out there as much as we can. But if you're coming from somewhere in the South, I'd love to hear some stories of warmth. Sending warm thoughts would be really good. What else do I usually tell you at the beginning? Where you can find me. So I'm Knitting the Stash just about everywhere, on Ravelry and Instagram, and obviously on YouTube. I love friending people over there on Ravelry and following people on Instagram. So hit me up, and then I can check out what you guys are working on. And you can also check out the main website, which is knittingthestash.com. And that is where everything is. So links to classes and tutorials, patterns, and the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, where I sell lots of fun small batch yarn. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. So on the episode for today, I have, as I said, strategies for trying new yarn. It's an interesting topic, and it's something that I hear about a lot, especially because I run the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. And it's hard to buy yarn when you can't see it, right? When you can't hold it in your hand and check it out. So here's some strategies for trying out yarn, especially if you're going to be buying it online. And the last thing, last but certainly not least, is we've reached a huge milestone here. And I don't usually celebrate milestones like this, but I was kind of thrown for a loop the other day when I checked my messages and it said, you've reached 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. So yeah, that's kind of big. It feels worth celebrating. So I thought we'd celebrate it together with a big giveaway, and I'll talk about it at the end, but it's going to involve lots and lots of yarn. That's what good giveaways are, right? So at the end, we'll do a giveaway, especially for all of you YouTubers who have been hitting that subscribe button and the little bell alarm thing and, making this whole thing happen for the last few years. I'm just so touched that we've gotten up to 10,000 subscribers, and I just can't quite fathom it. So let's do a giveaway. It'll be really fun. So first up, let's talk about strategies for trying new yarn. It can be a completely nerve-wracking process to go online and try to check out a yarn and think about, like, what is it that I'm going to get when I order this yarn? Not only for colors are kind of like the main thing that I get questions about and that people struggle with, I think, because monitors can mess up colors, and it's hard to photograph a color in exactly the right way. And I know this because I've been photographing yarn for a while for that Flock Farm Yarn Shop. And it's really difficult to get a good photograph that's an accurate representation of the color and then have that translate onto someone else's monitor or phone or something like that. So color is a tricky thing, but it's also tricky to know what you're going to get in terms of the hand of a yarn. Is it going to be soft? Is it going to be squishy? Is it going to pill immediately when you start knitting with it? Is it going to be durable? Is it going to split? All of those different things that you think about when you're using a yarn, the actual tactile part of using a yarn. And then there's always questions about, will this yarn, it's labeled, something like, I just started using a yarn for one of my hat patterns that's labeled as a worsted weight. And when I started knitting with it on size 2 needles, I was like, this is not a worsted weight. So yeah, you have to kind of figure out the grist of a yarn, and you can do all of this online, but it's a little bit tricky. So let's talk about some strategies for trying new yarn and feeling like happy and successful about it, right? This is the trick. So one of my first tips is to create an accessory, right? A one skein project. It lets you try out a yarn, and you can get a sense of its hand and the way the colors transfer when you actually get it in, in your home as opposed to seeing it on a screen. And you can get a sense of how it works up, like how it's going to behave on your actual needles. So for example, I have a bunch of one skein kind of projects over in the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, and one of them is Ridgedale Yarns, which is a yarn from Iowa, and it's a kind of nubbly yarn a little bit. It's a worsted weight or even maybe a bulky, and Isabel Stokes, one of these wonderful designers who's helped out with the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, put together this beautiful hat. This is the Aspen Beanie, and the cool thing is that she was designing specifically for this yarn. So if you can find a one skein accessory that was specifically designed for the yarn, that's going to be a great way to try out a new yarn, because the designers had a chance to look at the yarn, think about it, swatch with it, figure out what is going to kind of work with it in terms of texture and color and stitch pattern and sizing and all those kinds of things. And then they're going to be creating a pattern that's going to show off or highlight that yarn in a particular kind of way. So for this yarn, she was paying attention to the fact that it has its own texture to it, and that it is a 3-ply yarn, so it's going to be great for cables. And she put together this really simple cable pattern that allows the yarn to kind of pop off the hat. And it works well with the ribbing, because the ribbing too is a textural piece of this hat. So it's really cool to see a yarn that you're interested in trying. You see it actually knit up in a design that was created for that yarn. So a one skein accessory can be an excellent way to try out a yarn. It gives you a chance to do a small project, less investment in terms of money and time. And if you can, like I said, if you can find either a kit or a pattern that was designed specifically for that yarn, it'll be a great chance to try it out and give it a kind of test run before you go and buy a sweater's quantity, because then you'll know what's going to work well with that yarn. So that's tip number 1. And tip number 2 is to incorporate the new yarn into a project that allows you to mix and match some yarns. So, for example, this is the Bogaji shawl, and it is a mix of different textures and kind of panels. Stephen West's work would be great for this as well. So for each of these panels, you could try a different yarn. So for me, I actually mixed and matched 2 different yarns from 2 different makers for this shawl, and I think they worked out really well. They just happen to have a similar kind of coloring, and the Bogaji shawl takes into account this kind of like, gives you a different idea. So you get some textural work here, you get some lace here, and you can kind of see how your yarn is going to function. And like I said, if you were to go with something like a Stephen West pattern, it might even be even better, because his patterns are kind of designed to stash bust and to use up one skein of yarn here in this colorway and one skein of yarn here and this other thing. So picking a pattern where you can incorporate multiple yarns, some from your stash and something new that you want to try, is a great idea. And it allows you to, again, take less risk, because all you're doing is putting one skein into a project to see what happens with it. The other, I guess this would be kind of like 2B, the second tier of the same recommendation, would be to incorporate that new yarn with a yarn that you know well in a pattern that calls for a couple different yarns. So you might take a yarn that you've knit a lot with, maybe a sweater or a bunch of accessories or something that you really like, and you find a yarn that's similar in terms of grist, which is the actual yards per pound of a yarn, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But if you can find 2 yarns that have relatively the same grist, then putting them together in a pattern should work out well, and you can try the new yarn alongside one of those yarns that you know kind of well, because you know what the grist is going to be. So weight-wise, you're going to be matching up. It'll be like a matchy-matchy kind of a thing. Now, grist is something that I talk about in my online classes, and I'm actually putting together a new class right now on choosing yarn for your next project. So all of this kind of feeds into that a little bit. But grist is basically, you can't just pick up a yarn and say like, oh, it's labeled worsted weight and this one's labeled worsted weight, therefore they'll be the same, because all worsted weight yarn is not created equal. Same with fingering weight yarn, etc., etc. So what you need to look at is actually how many yards or meters you have per ounce or gram. Let's just say the yarn you want to try is 250 yards for 4 ounces. And the yarn that you have in your stash is about 230 yards for 4 ounces. They're going to be a really similar grist, and they're probably going to pair up well in terms of weight. I'm not talking about color or ply or anything else, but in terms of weight, those 2 yarns might match up pretty well. So grist is actually just making sure you're comparing apples to apples rather than, a worsted weight, whatever that is, to a worsted weight, right? So actually look, you gotta dig into your yarn labels and look to see what the yardage or the meterage is per gram or ounce or gram. I'm mixing them up. Anyway. But if you can do that, then that'll go in with my second tip here of like trying to pair up a new yarn with a yarn that you like and that you know really well. Okay, strategy number 3 is to dig into some reviews. So see if you can find someone who's swatched with the yarn or made a project out of the yarn. So Ravelry is your friend here. You can check out tons of Ravelry project pages. This is what I always do before I start a project, or even before I buy a pattern or buy a certain kind of yarn. I will look to see who else has knit with this yarn and what it looks like. Try to get a close-up, look at what it looks like in action on the needles if someone has a photograph of that, a whip, a work in progress on their Ravelry page. It's going to be great to be able to see, does the yarn look like it's splitty? Does it look like it's holding its twist well? Does it look like it's kind of plump? Is it fulled out? Is it leaving holes? Is it showing texture? All these different things you can find out from those Ravelry project pages. But you can also go on YouTube and look for yarn reviews. There are tons of companies now, and I know this because a lot of them approach me to do yarn reviews, and I often say no, just because I want this channel to be like my channel, not just yarn reviews. But they want to have yarn reviews available in part because of this question of how do you try a new yarn and feel confident about it. So you can look for yarn reviews on YouTube. There are plenty of podcasters or tutorial makers who will have a separate video out for a new kind of yarn or for a particular company's version of a bunch of different yarns. And you can often find a review there and watch somebody crochet with the yarn or stitch with the yarn and see what it actually looks like and how it works up. They'll swatch little bits, they'll talk about the experience of working with the yarn, and that's a kind of first-hand account of how this yarn will look and work out for you. So your 4th strategy for trying a new yarn is to see if the person that you're buying yarn from has something like a sample card for purchase or a sample pack for swatching. And this is something I'm thinking about incorporating into the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, so let me know if you'd like to see that. But basically it would be a card, and often you'll see this for color work. So a yarn shop or a small producer or a large producer might offer a yarn card where they have holes punched and then they've left you with a piece of yarn for each of the colors that they offer. And that allows you to mix and match, see what the colors look like together, photograph them together, black and white, to see if there's going to be enough contrast, all that kind of good stuff. But you can also have sample cards with the different kinds of yarn so that you can get a sense of the ply, the thickness, whether or not the twist is good, all these different things that make up a yarn and matter when you're going to go and use a yarn in knitting or crochet or another craft. So you might get a sample card that way, or a sample pack, which would be maybe small skeins, mini skeins of different yarns, so that you can swatch up some 6x6 squares and get a sense of how that yarn behaves on different size needles or something like that. So sample cards or sample packs might be a way to try a yarn. Sure, you have to pay for them, but it's a good investment because if you're thinking about using a yarn for a sweater, you can already have knit your swatch from this sample pack or this, you can already get a sense of how the yarn behaves from that sample card. So those are maybe an option in some cases, and like I said, I'd like to know if you'd be interested in that for the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, so let me know. So my number 5 strategy, my 5th strategy for trying a new yarn is gift knitting, baby knitting, that kind of thing. So you might knit up a miniature version of the sweater that you're interested in. This one took me less than a skein of yarn to knit up, and it was for one of my classes inspired by design. So you've seen this before, and if you're in the class, you've probably seen me make it, so you know how it was constructed. But you can do gift knitting or baby knitting with a skein of yarn. It's never going to go to waste because you're going to give it away to someone who could use it, and or put it in your gift box of, a lot of us have a box of things that we've completed that we don't know what to do with and we know we're going to give them to someone eventually. Baby knitting is perfect because you could try out miniature versions of your sweater to see what happens with different textural patterns, like the lace panel I've inserted here, or shaping that's going on in the back, things like that. So number 5 is just plan on it being a baby or a gift knit, and you get to try out the yarn, knit something fun, and then give it away if you don't like it. And if you do like it, then you can order more yarn and make that sweater for yourself, right? So those are my 5 strategies. The first one is knit those one skein accessories that come from a designer who's actually worked with and looked at and thought about that yarn. So kits are great. Number 2, incorporate that yarn into a pattern where you're just kind of grabbing different skeins. So you can work with a yarn that you know really well or a bunch of different yarns and try them all out. And like I said, Stephen West's patterns might be the perfect ticket for that one. You can look at those Ravelry project pages and the YouTube reviews and see how that yarn works up. And you can look at sample cards or sample packs of the yarn to see if you can try before you buy. You invest a tiny bit of money in those sample packs or sample cards, but you get something really great out of it. And then last but not least, gift knitting. We all do it every once in a while, and it's a good strategy for trying out new yarns on those small projects. So with all that being said, I want to show you a bunch of the kits that we have or have had in the past in the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, because they do exactly what strategy number 1 does, which is find a kit, find a designer that's looked at and worked with and thought about that yarn and maximized it for a one skein accessory. So I've had so many wonderful designers work with me in with Shorn, the yarns that I produce each year, and with a lot of the different small batch yarns from the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. And if you're interested, by the way, I have an ongoing call for designers out there, and I'd love to have your new design featured in the shop with some of this small batch yarn. So get in touch with me. There's a call up on the website, knittingthestash.com, and I'll put links below in the show notes. But I love to work with new designers and particularly encourage submissions from the BIPOC community. So get in touch, and I'd love to talk with you about the possibility of a design. So let me show you a few of the wonderful patterns that have come out of the Flock Farm Yarn Shop that are specifically for the small batch yarns that I'm producing or that I'm featuring in the shop. For example, this was the first two patterns that came out of Shorn number 1. This was a beautiful Cormo yarn, gorgeous Cormo. You can feel it. It's just so squishy. And Albina McLaughlin designed a couple of different accessories. This is a cowl. This is the Scylla cowl. Cilla, and this is the Scylla hat, and she used this smocking stitch for each of them, and I can't tell you how soft and squishy this is. I wish I had more Shorn 1 left in the shop, but Shorn tends to sell out pretty quickly, so it's not always hanging around in the shop. So when I do those Shorn releases, get on the newsletter if you want to know about them, be the first to know about them, but the next one's going to be coming in the next year once I get stuff back from the mill. So yeah, Shorn is fun. It's one of those yarns that comes but once a year. So Shorn 2 was a beautiful gray blend of Corriedale and Teeswater and a little bit of long wool. And Kefren Pritchett put together this traveling hat, which has gorgeous cables, and these traveling mitts, which I absolutely love. And I had to steal these back from Spencer, my husband, because he has them in his stash and he wears them all the time to keep warm. They're fingerless mitts, so they're great for working outside. They have a long kind of cuff on them. And the nice thing about any of these patterns that I'm showing you is that the designers still have the patterns up on the websites. So even if I don't have the yarn for the Shorn 1 and Shorn 2, you can still get the traveling hats and mitts from Kefren Pritchett over on Ravelry and on her website, and you can still get Albina McLaughlin's patterns. She has tons of wonderful patterns over on her website or on Ravelry. Now Shorn 3, I still have some Shorn 3 and some Shorn 3 kits. So Shorn 3 is fingering weight yarn that is a beautiful blend of Corriedale and Corriedale Teeswater crosses, and this is one of the kits. This is the My Tassel Hat by Laurie Lamont. Beautiful cables and a really cool different kind of ribbing for the brim. So it's not just like your plain 1x1 or 2x2 ribbing. It's like a funky ribbing. Then we have the Wikipedia mitts. I'll put them on so you can see them. And these are by Amy Engelbrecht-Wiggans. So if you're interested in trying out the Shorn 3 yarn, which I do still have in the shop, and I have the kits all available. These are the Wikipedia mitts by Amy Engelbrecht-Wiggans. These were all designed specifically for Shorn. I sent the designers the yarn, they played with it, they thought about it, and they came up with these awesome designs. So we have my tassel hat, we have the Wikipedia mitts, and there are Wikipedia socks, though I don't have my sample with me today. So all of those are available over in the shop, specifically for those yarns. And then we have tons of other beautiful patterns in the shop. I already showed you the Aspen Beanie by Isabel Stokes, and this one was designed for Ridgedale Farm yarn. She also designed some beautiful colorwork mittens for My Local Yarn, which is a collab with Kathy Capel and Beth Engelbrecht-Wiggans from Illinois. And she put together this beautiful colorwork pattern for these mitts, and I just love them. And I have kits, just a few left. I think I have a handful of kits left over in the shop. But this was, when this pattern came out, people loved these. These are just gorgeous. I love these mitts so, so much. And this is a woolen spun yarn, super warm, super lofty. These are incredibly lightweight, fun to do colorwork with because the colorwork really blooms and fills in your stitches, and I absolutely love these mitts. So that's Isabel Stokes. She also has a new hat pattern out, not with me in the Flock Farm Yarn shop, but over in her own Ravelry shop, and just gorgeous. So she's coming up with some cool designs. And then you guys have seen this. This is the Fire and Ice Cowl, which I just put out maybe 2 weeks ago. And this is in the Georgia Rustic Wool, which is a beautiful this happens to be a 2-ply, 100% Gulf Coast native. It would work well with the 3-ply as well. And it's just a very simple cowl. This one's great for if you're trying to learn lace and cables. Very simple stitches. Perfect for beginners. Here's the cable panel. I think you can see it. One skein wonder. And actually I think you might be able to get 2 of these out of 1 skein of yarn. So it's nice to think about how to maximize your yarn as well if you're trying to try a new yarn and think about how you can use it. So I feel like I've tried a lot of new yarns in the last year with this Flock Farm Yarn shop, and I love working with these small batch producers because what you get with each yarn is so special. You're not going to find it other places, and when you have a skein of it in your hand, it's like it has a history, it has a narrative, and the designers who are working with these yarns have actually really thought about how this yarn is going to best work out with the particular patterns that they've put together. So strategies for trying new yarn, find those kits, find those places where someone has thought about the yarn and how it's going to work out in a pattern. This one too, so I can't leave this one hanging. This is with Ranching Tradition Fiber, which is a brand new yarn that I have in the shop in the DK weight. This is the Meltdown pullover that I knit maybe a couple years ago, back in 2020, I think. With the pandemic years, it's just hard to tell. But this is a sample that I put together because Cami Noyes did an interview over on the blog and did a giveaway of some yarn, and so she sent me some samples of her new Tobacco Root Valley yarn, and I chose to take 4 skeins and knit it up into this Meltdown sweater, which has a really cool side detail here. I think you can see it. I'd recommend the pattern very much. It's a top-down yoked pullover with 3/4 length sleeves, and it's fun to kind of play around with the colors. And since I started the Flock Farm Yarn shop, I got back in touch with Cami to see if I could get some of her yarn in the shop. So those of you who get the newsletter know that this is already there, but for those of you who don't, this is the newest yarn in the shop. It is the Tobacco Root Valley DK weight yarn, and it's a 100% Targhee Rambouillet, so it's even softer than a merino, I have to say. It's got some sproing to it, some bounce. And it, as you can see, it folds and blooms really beautifully in a larger project in the stitches. It does some nice blending, I think. So I have in the shop, I have Madison, and Madison is this middle color that I used on the sweater. I just had to have it because I absolutely love Madison. It's this beautiful blue. Not quite a sky blue, not quite a gray blue, it's somewhere in between. Really beautiful. And then I also have, this is Granite and Sumac and Larkspur, which is a beautiful purple. So we have 4 colors up in the shop. Like I said, Targhee Rambouillet, DK weight. I do have sweater quantities, so if you're interested in knitting up your own sweater in Madison or in sumac or granite or something like that, there is plenty of yarn over there. And there's an interview with Cami over on the website as well, so you can read about her. She's a 5th generation rancher in Montana, and she's been working with fiber and wool for a very long time, so she's a great producer, excellent contact, someone who knows a lot about the wool industry and what's happening, and she's just incredibly fun to talk to. So there's an interview over there, and her yarn is in the shop, which is really exciting. And the other shop update that I forgot to mention at the beginning is that I've restocked the Georgia Rustic Wool alpaca blend, which is this beautiful color. We totally sold out of this. So if you were looking for it, it is back in stock now. I think I only have 10 skeins though, so if you're looking for a sweater quantity of this particular yarn, jump over there and grab it. This is 75% Gulf Coast native and 25% alpaca. And we pretty much sold out within the first couple weeks of getting it into the shop. So Joanne Mackey of Georgia Rustic Wool sent me over some more. The other thing that Joanne sent over is this really interesting blend of Gulf Coast native alpaca, so 75-20, and then 5% nylon. And I think this would make for a really great sock yarn. It's just a little bit, it's like a heavy fingering weight, I'd say, but it feels like it's gonna have some good strength for sock knitting. And I have a couple of different colors. They're kind of by sheep. So we have 3 different, they're very, very close in color, very close to this, but slight variation. So if you order more than one skein, I will make sure to match you up with whichever batch you're interested in. But they all are pretty much the same. Perfect for socks. And I kind of want to knit a pair of socks up for my son in this because I think it's kind of perfect with the nylon blend. A lot of you asked for sock yarn and nylon, and so here you go. We got Georgia Rustic Wool. It's a good sock yarn, I think, in the shop. So we're just about at the end of the podcast, and now it is giveaway time. This is the 10K giveaway, and I wanted to make it a big one because it's a big celebration, I think. And I want to thank all of you who donated Ko-fis. So Jenny and Susan, Jennifer, Paula, Alice and Susan, Vanessa and Megan, thank you so much for sending in coffees for the podcast. And you all are helping to support this giveaway in particular, and I just wanted to say thank you and let everyone else know how wonderful it is that you've helped support this awesome giveaway. So I hope you all will enter the actual giveaway. And the giveaway is for a lot of yarn. Yes, 10K giveaway deserves something big. So I've gone through the Flock Farm Yarn shop and picked out some of my favorites, some of these fun skeins for you to try. So if you want to try a new yarn, this is perfect. You get at least one skein of a bunch of different kinds of yarn and a couple skeins of shorn, so that if you wanted to go and try out, let's say, one of the patterns that I talked about today, you can go either to knittingthestash.com or to those independent designers' websites and download those patterns from them. All the proceeds from patterns in my shop go directly to the designers, so it's the same if you buy them from knittingthestash.com or if you buy them over on Ravelry or they're on their websites from the designers themselves. 100% of the proceeds go to the designers. So I love doing that. I think it's the way it should be done, and this way you get to try out a lot of different yarn and maybe a bunch of different patterns. So let's talk about what's actually in the giveaway bundle. I have a quantity of yarn that would be perfect for those mitts I was talking about, and this was one of the most popular colorways. It was the natural with the spruce. So that is going to be one of the things that's in the big yarn giveaway. I have some beautiful heirloom in the hyacinth colorway. God, I love that colorway. It's just like poppin'. And this is the yarn that I knit up the rose cottage cap in. So there's patterns out there for this particular yarn. I have a Fox Run fiber skein in here. This is 100% Cormo. So if you've ever been interested in trying Cormo, this is a 2-ounce skein, perfect for like a little baby accessory or a hat or something small. Really lovely yarn. And this is naturally dyed. So this is dyed with delphinium, marigold, and peony to make this beautiful bright yellow. I have a skein of Ridgedale Farm yarn in there. This one's from A Sheep Named Horse, and it is a Rambouillet Columbia blend, and it's perfect for that aspen beanie that I mentioned earlier. It's just a 1 skein project. And we've got some beautiful Prairie Shepherds in there. And Prairie Shepherds was used by Jennifer Chisam, and actually I didn't pull her pattern up. Jennifer Chisam designed this beautiful flock cowl for the shop, and this is one version that uses the Ridgedale farm yarns, but she knit up her version using the Prairie Shepherd's yarn, so that pattern is out there. And this particular colorway is the Prairie Duck. Prairie Duck skein. It's got some really cool strawberry tones in there. And this one is a blend of Cornmeal, Corriedale, and Leicester Longwool, so it's a really interesting blend that you're not likely to find other places. And last but not least, I of course have to throw in some Shorn yarn, and this is Shorn 3, the fingering weight version that is the Corriedale Teeswater Cross. And as I mentioned, it goes with these beautiful patterns like the My Tassel Hat, or the Wikipedia mitts, or the Wikipedia socks that were designed by such lovely people. They're wonderful to work with, all of them. So that is the 10K giveaway. All beautiful yarn from the Flock Farm Yarn Shop in various weights and colors and breeds and all kinds of different things. And one of you guys will be winning this prize. All you have to do to enter is leave me a comment here. I'd love to know what you'd like to see on the podcast or what you'd like to see in the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. That's all you have to do. Let me know what you're interested in so that I can get to know you better and I can keep making podcasts that are of interest to you and keep getting yarn for the shop that you'd like to try out, to try something new. So thank you all for making my day and getting us up to 10K. I hope you'll put your hat in the ring for the giveaway, and I'm hoping that these strategies for trying new yarn were actually helpful for you. So I will see you in a couple of weeks, and in the meantime, take good care. Bye-bye.